Hi, hello, welcome back to my place on the internet. My name is Amanda and I am here to talk about the transformational power of poetry and how poetry can change your life. I am a published poet, a poetry editor for a literary and arts magazine, and I have my Master's of Fine Arts in Poetry. Moving into the second part of this video, I wanted to briefly mention how poetry has changed my life personally. My poetic journey really starts in college, which is when I started taking reading and writing poetry much more seriously, and it was because I took an introduction to creative writing class. During this time, I was also facing some mental health issues, mostly depression. Poetry kind of came at the perfect time to help me navigate a lot of the complex and overwhelming emotions and struggles that I was facing. Both reading and writing poetry for me provided a lot of clarity and started to unearth a lot of feelings, emotions, thoughts, and ideas that I had in my subconscious brain that I didn't even realize that were coming out through these poems. Poetry really helped me to find solutions and change my perspective on various issues, which is why today I kind of see it as a divination tool or a form of shadow work, because you're really diving into your unconscious self. Poetry for me has shifted into a kind of spiritual practice, and this really happened in my first year of grad school. At that point in time, I was already spiritual for a few years and into things like angel numbers, crystals, tarot, etc., etc. I'm not sure what triggered it, but I did have a moment where it kind of clicked with me that I could treat poetry and writing poems as a part of my spiritual practice. I did make a short form video about this semi-recently, which I will play here. Obviously, some of this won't apply to everyone and everyone's unique spiritual beliefs, but if you are open to incorporating poetry as a part of a spiritual practice, it can really open a whole new world of possibilities. Next, I wanted to briefly talk about the science of poetry and how it can really be transformational from a scientific perspective. There are a variety of peer-reviewed studies that show the powerful effects of poetry. From the National Association for Poetry Therapy to the International Federation for Biblio/Poetry Therapy to the Journal of Poetry Therapy, there are a variety of organizations and studies researching the scientific benefits of poetry. A 2003 study published in the Journal of Psychiatric and Mental Health Nursing found that therapeutic writing and poetry therapy were linked to increased self-awareness, positive social interactions, and overall healthier functioning. A 2022 study on unaccompanied refugee minors from Afghanistan in the Journal of Poetry Therapy found poetic writing to be a tool for building new social networks, understanding traumatic events, and conveying personal experiences. Another 2023 study in this same journal found that a virtual COVID poetry platform was linked to beneficial mental health and well-being. The poetry website helped participants reduce feelings of isolation, loneliness, depression, and anxiety. All of that being said, please remember that poetry is not a substitute by any means for medical professionals, therapy, or doctors of any kind. If you have, for example, severe trauma or mental illness, having a healing poetry practice may work better in tandem with professional care. All right, we have finally made it to the tofu/vegan meat of the video, which is how to use poetry to change your life. Number one, I want to stress the importance of reading poetry before you jump into a writing practice. I think a lot of times when people think about healing through poetry, they're thinking about writing poems. But reading poetry can also be a transformative way to achieve your personal or emotional development goals. For me personally, there are numerous poems that I have read that have completely changed my life or changed my perspective. One of these poems is How to Triumph Like a Girl by Ada Limon. For me, this is one of the first poems where I really felt the aliveness in poetry. So I am going to briefly read it to you. It's very short, I promise. How to Triumph Like a Girl. I like the lady horses best. how they make it all look easy, like running 40 miles per hour is as fun as taking a nap or grass. I like their lady horse swagger after winning. Ears up, girls, ears up. But mainly, let's be honest, I like that they're ladies, as if this big dangerous animal is also a part of me, that somewhere inside the delicate skin of my body, there pumps an 8-pound female horse heart, giant with power, heavy with blood. Don't you want to believe it? Don't you want to lift my shirt and see the huge beating genius machine that thinks, no, it knows, it's going to come in first. Even reading it just now, I got chills. So magical, so good. I will also include a list on the screen of books that I really recommend reading that have transformed my life or that I think would be transformational to others. I'm a big believer of reading what you feel drawn towards and not worrying about getting it or understanding every little part of a poem. As you're doing all of this reading, I would also recommend journaling and starting to think about potential topics that you might want to unpack through poetry. Think about your childhood, any periods of trauma or unhealed emotions, triggers, or any topics that you keep coming back to or feel might be helpful if you unpacked. Another thing that can be important is setting the mood. For example, if you plan to make writing a spiritual practice, you can set up your space accordingly, whether that means using specific crystals for creativity, lighting candles or incense, or meditating beforehand. Make sure that you do what feels right and works for you. Regardless of if you're using poetry as a spiritual practice, I would also recommend making sure that you set aside time without distractions. Another thing you can do before you start actually writing poems is to try free writing. Free writing is a form of stream of consciousness writing where you set aside a couple minutes or any amount of time and write whatever comes to your mind in that time frame. The key part of free writing is to remove any judgment and really focus on just writing everything that you're thinking about or everything you see around you, or whatever the case may be, is to just keep writing without worrying about editing or placing judgment over what you're writing or how you're writing or anything like that. Speaking about judgment, another way to think about poetry when you're first getting into it is to purposely write bad poetry. Take the pressure off of yourself from writing something quote unquote good by letting the poem be bad if it wants to. Not every poem is meant to be published or read by others, and there is absolutely no harm in writing poems for yourself to work through complex emotions or complicated feelings. During this process, you can also use poetry prompts to help you get the ball rolling. Poetsandwriters.org has a lot of great poetry prompts on their website. There's also NaPoWriMo.net, even though it's no longer the month of April, which is when that challenge is typically for. I personally like to go back past April and use some of those prompts anytime of the year, or you can also just Google poetry prompts for X topic or whatever if you're trying to work on a specific theme or topic. A really important piece of advice is to let the poem be what it wants to be. I think so often a lot of us have a specific idea of how we want a poem to turn out, what we want the message to be, what we want to convey. It is important to have some level of intention behind poems, but I think a lot of us focus too much on kind of controlling the poem in forcing it to be something that it might not want to be. A lot of times when I'm writing poems, the poem will take a direction that I did not expect it to take, or I initially wasn't thinking about. Sometimes I just feel like the poem wants to go a certain way or a certain direction, and it's important to kind of lean into that and let the poem gravitate towards the spaces that it wants to go, even if it's not initially what you wanted it to be. Especially when it comes to transformation and healing, giving some flexibility to the poem and to the outcome of the poem and kind of letting the poem go where it needs to go and say what it needs to say can really be impactful in providing the transformation and change that we want to see. Like I mentioned earlier, oftentimes subconscious ideas, emotions, and thoughts will come out through poetry. I totally get that it's hard to surrender full control to a poem, but I would really get in the practice of kind of letting the poem take you where you're meant to go. Also, don't beat yourself up if you can't hear what a poem is trying to say to you at first. Keep practicing, keep writing, keep experimenting, and eventually you will understand what this feels like and what it means to give permission to the poem to work its full magic. It's also okay if you don't get any new information, clarity, or answers in a poem. Sometimes the act of writing itself can be therapeutic. Sometimes an issue or event is too fresh, to fully navigate through a poem. Sometimes it takes writing several poems about one issue to get clarity. And sometimes a poem is just not the best way to process certain topics. Practice consistency. You do not need a writing routine or standardized time and frequency of writing for poetry to be transformational. But you do need to find some level of consistency, whether that be reading one book a month or writing 4 poems a month. Some form of returning to the practice and working on the craft is needed to see true healing, growth, and change. Closing your practice. After writing poems, you kind of have to experiment to figure out what works best for you, but for me, I usually recommend stepping back from a poem once you immediately write it. When you first write a piece, it can be hard to see it objectively, clearly, and truthfully. Taking anywhere from a day to a few days to a couple of weeks to step back and then return and reevaluate a poem can be very insightful in learning what came out of it and overall processing everything. Something that I learned in grad school that has really transformed my poetry practice is reading your poems out loud instead of just in your head. When you're reading it out loud, new insights and breakthroughs can emerge, and it is a totally different experience. Reflect on anything that feels powerful, profound, or worth coming back to, and try to reflect on the process. You 100% do not have to have a big takeaway after every poem you write, but it is good to reflect on what parts of the writing process worked, what parts didn't, and what you might do differently next time. Again, give yourself grace and self-compassion and know that your path to transformation might look different from my path or anyone else's path. Listen to your intuition, keep showing up, and overall trust the process. That is all for this video. I hope this was helpful in some capacity, in some form. Let me know down below if you found anything insightful in this video, and make sure to like this video and subscribe if you have not already. Thank you so much for making it to the end of my video. I love talking about poetry and spirituality and self-growth and how all of these topics intersect. So if you are interested in more of this content, then stay tuned for upcoming videos. With that all being said, I will see you next time. Peace out. Oh, right. Fuck, I'm getting so dizzy. Why did I do that? If I'm out of focus in this video, I'm going to be so mad. Back to my place on the internet. Wait, I just got a notification. It's a text from my boyfriend. Of course, literally right when I started filming. I just went to get my hair, my roots bleached earlier today, so I'm feeling pretty good about my hair right now. We have finally made it to the meat of the video, or vegan meat in my case. I should say tofu.